Just as Claire felt that there was a tremendous change in Charlie, Kenneth, who had just escaped from the hall, returned with 4 bodyguards by his side. These 4 bodyguards were the 4 most capable bodyguards working for him, and each of them had extraordinary strength and fighting skills. In his opinion, it would be easy for these 4 bodyguards of his to kill Charlie. However, he did not want to kill Charlie in front of the crowd of people. He wanted to force Charlie into submission and call him his grandfather in front of everyone here today. After gaining back his own face, he would then destroy Charlie's manhood. After that, he would look for another opportunity to get rid of Charlie in the future. Everything that he was going to do today was just to relieve all of his pent-up anger. Kenneth knew that the only way he would be able to relieve all the hatred that he was feeling inside was by killing Charlie. After all, he had already lived for more than 50 years, and he had never felt as embarrassed or humiliated as he felt today. After rushing into the venue with his bodyguards, Kenneth pointed at Charlie before he shouted, "I will give $1 million to the person who destroys his manhood today." $1 million was a huge sum of money to the bodyguards. Therefore, as soon as they heard Kenneth's words, all 4 of the bodyguards had a grim expression on their faces as they rushed toward Charlie simultaneously. When Claire saw the bodyguards rushing at Charlie, she screamed out in fright and wanted to pull Charlie away. However, Charlie stood still without moving at all. Escape? No way! He was Charlie Wade. How could he possibly be afraid of this kind of battle? He was not in the slightest bit afraid at all. Moreover, Charlie had already mastered all of the fighting skills that he had studied from the apocalyptic book, so he was certain that these bodyguards would not be a match for him at all. The 4 bodyguards stared at Charlie as though he was a bundle of banknotes. They were all afraid that they would lose out on the money if they were one step too late, so they all rushed at him desperately. Charlie smiled as his eyes locked onto the movements of the 4 bodyguards at the same time. At this time, Charlie was just patiently waiting for them to rush at him so that he could destroy them immediately. One of the bodyguards who had practiced sprinting quickly took the lead and smiled before he said to Charlie, "Young man, you must be tired of living. Who gave you the courage to mess with Chairman Wilson? I am going to kill you." As soon as his voice fell, the bodyguard had already appeared in front of Charlie. Just as everyone thought that Charlie would face a severe beating, Charlie suddenly jumped on the spot before kicking the bodyguard in his chest. Bam! The bodyguard, who was about 190 centimeters tall, flew back immediately. With just one kick, Charlie had already broken 14 of his ribs. There were only 24 ribs in a human's body, and Charlie had already broken more than half of them with one kick. As the bodyguard hit the ground after flying back, blood began spurting out of his mouth, and he looked very miserable and pitiful. By then, the 3 bodyguards who were left behind had already caught up. All of them were rushing forward as they marked Charlie as their target, because they were all afraid that they would lose out on the $1 million. As a result, they did not expect this young man to suddenly become a powerful human cannonball, and he immediately kicked the 3 of them, instantly knocking them to the ground. Wow! Everyone witnessing the scene could not help but exclaim out loud. No one would have imagined that Charlie would have such a powerful kick. At this time, one of the women at the scene exclaimed, He is just like IP Man!" Charlie glanced at her before he sneered, "IP Man? Even if there are 10 IP Mans in this world, he could never be compared to me, Charlie Wade." Charlie was not bragging. Even though the martial artist, IP Man, was truly very strong, he had not exceeded the scope of an ordinary person. On the other hand, since Charlie had been studying and practicing everything that he learned from the apocalyptic book, his body had been physically and internally strengthened by the spiritual energy. Therefore, no matter how strong an ordinary person was, they would never be able to compete with Charlie. By now, the first bodyguard who was kicked in the chest by Charlie had already passed out. The remaining 3 bodyguards were all lying on the ground, wailing and crying out loud, because they had suffered numerous fractures all over their bodies. The bodyguards had a horrified look in their eyes as they stared at Charlie. Why was this young man so scary? The 3 of them were attacking him at one go, and yet they were actually defeated by just one young man? They had lost their combat effectiveness just like that? This young man was simply a god. Charlie walked toward the 3 bodyguards before he stared at them with a cold expression on his face. "Since you enjoy being a dog for others, I will make sure that you can only crawl on the ground in the future." After that, Charlie stepped on one of the bodyguard's right leg. Snap! The man's right kneecap was crushed immediately. After that, he raised his foot again and subsequently crushed the opponent's left kneecap. When the other 2 bodyguards saw this, they were all trembling in shock. After that, the 2 bodyguards began crying and begging Charlie for mercy. Charlie replied coldly, "You are all hooligans who are crueler than anyone else when it comes to hurting other people. However, when you are hurt, you are more cowardly than anyone else. If I let you go today, you will definitely show this vicious expression on your face when you deal with people who are weaker than you in the future. I have to destroy you today for the sake of the people." Following that, regardless of their crying and pleading, Charlie crushed all of their kneecaps. Snap, 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 snap. There were now 3 more people who would not have the ability to stand on their own 2 feet again in this world. Everyone at the scene was shocked by Charlie's ferociousness. Kenneth and Wendy were also trembling in fear at this time. Kenneth would never have imagined that Charlie would be so cruel and strong. He never expected Charlie to defeat all 4 of his most capable bodyguards just like that. He had destroyed them completely. They were all pro fighters, and one of them was actually the national fighting champion just a few years ago. Kenneth felt his legs going soft, and he felt cold in the spot where he had wet himself earlier. He turned around silently as he tried to escape. No matter what happened, he could not allow himself to fall into Charlie's hands. At this time, someone suddenly yelled, "You old man! Are you trying to escape after provoking Mr. Wade?" Immediately after that, the crowd of people made way as Orville walked in with a group of men behind him. Orville sneered before he stopped directly in front of Kenneth. Kenneth looked at him with a panicked expression on his face before he asked, Who are you?" Slap! Orville gave Kenneth a tight slap across his face without even responding to his question. There were 5 fingerprints on Kenneth's face as he said furiously, "Who do you think you are? You actually dared to hit me? I am the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce." Slap! Orville did not show him any mercy at all and gave Kenneth another slap across his face. "Chairman? I don't care if you are the chairman. If you are disrespectful toward Mr. Wade, you are courting death for yourself." Kenneth was very furious, but he was also frightened at this time. Therefore, he hurriedly said, "This is all just a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. There is just a simple misunderstanding between Mr. Wade and myself. I'm going to leave now. I'm leaving now." "You want to leave?" Orville smiled contemptuously before he said, "Have you asked for Mr. Wade's permission to let you leave?" Kenneth hurriedly turned and faced Charlie before he pleaded in a trembling voice, "Charlie, Mr. Wade, this is all just a misunderstanding. Those 4 guys wanted to create trouble for you, and I could not stop them. They already got the ending that they deserve now. Please, just let me go now." Charlie nodded and smiled before he said, "Okay, of course I can let you go. After all, I've already let you go once." After that, Charlie looked at Kenneth with a playful expression on his face as he said, "But what should you do so that I will let you go? Do you need me to teach you what to do?" Kenneth was afraid that Charlie would disable him just as he did to his bodyguards. Therefore, he quickly knelt to the ground before he cried and begged, "Dad, please, please just spare your son this time." Orville was stunned, and he blurted out immediately, "Oh my God, you are really pathetic." Kenneth smiled bitterly before he said, "I will tell you the truth. I have already learned my lesson." Contemptuous mockery echoed around them. Kenneth was such a wuss. He had called Charlie Dad 3 times over the course of a few minutes. Was he really the chairman of the renowned Modest Way group? He was such an embarrassment to himself and his company. Regardless, Kenneth couldn't care less about any of that. A great man knew when to yield and when not to. You had to be alive, and only then could you use your manhood, right? If you were dead, what good was your manhood then? So he quickly went toward Charlie to butter him up. "Dad, please be merciful and forgive me, please. I swear I'll be forever in your debt, Daddy." Charlie waved his hand and laughed. "You should have called me Dad earlier when I asked nicely. It's too late now." Kenneth gaped in surprise, thinking that Charlie wanted to mess with him. He pleaded desperately while tears drenched his cheeks. "Dad, please. I'm sorry, Daddy." Please forgive me." Charlie looked at Wendy, who was standing in a daze, and said flatly, "Wendy Wilson, your sugar daddy is already on his knees. Why are you still standing?" Wendy was startled at his remark and mumbled, What do you mean?" Kenneth stretched his hand out, violently pulling Wendy down on her knees as he chided, "Did you leave your brain at home, idiot? Don't you know you need to kneel before you can speak to my dad?" Kenneth's desire to survive was way stronger than reputation, dignity, and honor. This was his last resort. Wendy knelt on the floor like a stone statue, not daring to move nor speak. Kenneth glanced at Charlie desperately and asked, "Daddy, are you happy now?" Charlie shook his head. "Not really." Kenneth's heart skipped a beat. "What can I do to make you happy?" A mischievous smile appeared on Charlie's face as he said, "Call me Grandpa. Let me see how it makes me feel. If I'm happy with it, I can consider letting you go." Kenneth wished he could die right there and then. He had to be out of his mind today. Why did he want to cause trouble with Charlie in the first place? Not only did he not get anything beneficial from it, but he had run out of luck. He was beaten, forced on his knees, had to call Charlie Daddy, had peed his pants, and now he had to call Charlie Grandpa. It was the ultimatum of embarrassment. Seeing his hesitation, Charlie asked coldly, "Why, you don't want to?" Kenneth trembled in panic and said, Yes, I do." Then he knocked his head to the floor and cried loudly, "Grandpa, I'm sorry, please forgive me." Charlie frowned. "Who am I?" Tears flowed down Kenneth's cheeks like rivers. "You're my grandpa." "And who are you?" "I'm your grandson." Charlie nodded with a sly smile. "Good. Never knew I could be a grandfather at such a young age. In that case, I'll spare you." Kenneth breathed a sigh of relief and was about to stand up and leave when, "Hold on!" Charlie stopped him. "You want to leave just like that? Don't you have to say something first?" Kenneth bit his lips, enduring the humiliation and anger in his heart, as he respectfully said to Charlie, "Grandpa, can I go now?" Charlie patted his cheek and said, "Okay. Go now, my dear grandson." Tears of humiliation fell from Kenneth's eyes as he turned around and walked out tremblingly. Wendy hurriedly followed him out of the venue as well. They walked as fast as they could, worried that Charlie would stop them again, but Charlie had lost all interest in teasing them. Kenneth's manhood had completely malfunctioned now. He would be trapped in extreme despair for the rest of his life. After they went out, Orville rushed toward Charlie and said, "Master Wade, I'm sorry for being late. It's my fault for letting you waste your time and effort with that trash. I'm willing to accept any punishment for my negligence." Charlie waved his hand indifferently and asked, "Why are you here? Isn't this the summit for the construction and decoration industry? Are you in this field too?" "Yes," Orville chuckled and answered, "I am the biggest supplier of cement and sand in Oris Hill, which means that I'm the prominent middleman in the construction industry. So, they invited me to the summit." Charlie was aware that the cement and sand business was regarded as the gray area in the construction industry. Thus, it made sense for Orville to be involved in this, since he was from the underworld. Hence, he nodded and said, "Don't do so many harmful and destructive businesses. Stop bullying the honest and ordinary people." Orville said with a sheepish smile, "Yes, Master Wade, thanks to your lesson, I've come clean a long time ago. I wouldn't dare to do those harmful things now." Charlie nodded with a satisfying smile. Orville pointed to the 4 injured bodyguards and asked, "Master Wade, what about these people? The fainted guy, break his leg and throw him out of here. Throw them a little further away to not affect my mood." Orville nodded and ordered his men, "Hey, didn't you hear what Master Wade said? Go, start your work." The men bowed. "Yes, Master Wade." Then they broke the knee of the guy who had fainted first and dragged the 4 lifeless men toward the door. Without his bodyguards, Kenneth could only drive by himself. He drove Wendy to the hospital for the injury on her face and then drove back to the Wilson family villa. Kenneth was whining in pain the whole way, the wrath of fury burning furiously inside him. Wendy gritted her teeth and said indignantly, "Dear, Charlie, that loser even dared to lay his hands on you. The nerve he has! You can't let him off the hook." A gloomy disdain hovered over Kenneth's face. His eyes were as cold as daggers, and he growled, "Of course! I'll kill him! I'll even skin him alive and break all his bones. No one has dared to treat me this way ever." Wendy grinned wickedly. Her disgust toward Charlie was at its highest peak now, and she bet Charlie wouldn't live long once Kenneth targeted him. Wendy said in a cold voice, "Dear, take me with you when you do it. I want to torture him. I want to see him beg me for mercy." Kenneth punched the back of the seat violently and said, "I'll grind that bastard to dust." "That's awesome." Wendy knew that with Kenneth's background and wealth, it would be a piece of cake to get rid of Charlie. They were on the losing side today simply because they hadn't brought enough men. Would Charlie survive if Kenneth brought dozens of men next time? Charlie would be as dead as a doornail by then. As her imagination ran wild, she already felt the thrill of revenge inside her. She leaned toward Kenneth and said in a coy voice, "Dear, since that loser will be dead in your hands sooner or later, please don't be so angry now. It's bad for your body." Then she fiddled with his hair and whispered, "When we get home, I'll make you happy." Kenneth was so pissed off right now, and Wendy was a convenient tool for him to vent his anger out so that he didn't burn himself in the wrath of fury. As soon as they returned to the Wilson family villa, Kenneth dragged Wendy out of the car and rushed into the house. Christopher, Hannah, and Lady Wilson were sitting in the living room. When the parents saw Kenneth and Wendy rushing upstairs straight away without greeting them, a tinge of awkwardness hovered on their faces. Lady Wilson cleared her throat and said, "You guys should be grateful that Kenneth is fond of Wendy. Stop overthinking it." Christopher nodded reluctantly and answered, "Mom, I'm not overthinking it. I just feel a little awkward." Lady Wilson chided disdainfully. "What's so awkward about it? You're getting paid for it, aren't you? The $5 million that Kenneth gave to Wendy, is it in your hands now?" "Yes, Mom. It's with me." Lady Wilson sighed and softened her tone a bit. "See? If Wendy and Kenneth are getting more and more intimate, he may even give you $50 million. The money will go into your pocket by then, right? Think about it." Christopher felt a sense of relief inside him upon his mother's remark. The sole reason why they had approved of the relationship was because of money, pure and simple. Kenneth had invested $10 million in the Wilson Group and had even given an extra $5 million to Wendy as her pocket money. It was a lot of money, and this was just the beginning. Over time, he would have invested even more money in the Wilson family. All the awkwardness and uneasiness dispersed from Christopher's thought. He pulled his wife back to their room on the first floor. As soon as he entered the room, he said anxiously, "Darling, remember the ordinary residential area that we saw at the Thompson First the other day? The down payment is $5 or $6 million, and we've only managed to save enough for the down payment but not the renovations and furniture. But now, with Wendy's $5 million and our money, it's more than enough for us to buy the Thompson First house." Hannah was thrilled at first, but very soon she sulked in dismay. "No, I don't want to live in the ordinary residential area. Jacob's family and Charlie the loser will be staying in the villa area. Do you want me to live outside of them and be their guards? No way." What about this? We have nearly $10 million now. We'll talk to Wendy tomorrow and ask her to persuade Kenneth while they're having a good time and see if he can sponsor us another few $1,000,000. Then we'll have enough money for the down payment of the villa." Although Thompson First's villas cost hundreds of millions of dollars per unit, the prices of other villas in Orris Hill were not too high. A single-family villa was normally around $20 to $30 million, so even after deducting the 40% down payment, they would still have enough money in hand. However, renovations and furnishings were a huge expense that might need an additional $3 to $5 million, which the couple couldn't afford. However, if they could get Kenneth to sponsor them a little, the problem would be solved. Hannah shrieked a little excitedly and said, "Hey, do you think Kenneth will subsidize us a little more?" Christopher chuckled. "I think he will for the sake of Wendy. He seems to be quite fond of her, don't you think?" Hannah nodded, a gleeful smile pasted on her face. "Actually, from the looks of it, Kenneth is a much better companion for Wendy. At least he is more generous and lavish than Gerald, that bastard. After so many years of being together, our Wendy even aborted a child for him, but he never gave Wendy any pocket money." Christopher nodded and sighed furiously. "Yes, you're right. The White family are crooks, liars, and bastards." Hannah waved her hand in contempt. Forget about them. They'll pay for what they did to us and our baby girl. Let's talk about the villa instead. There are quite a lot of villas in Orris Hill. Why don't we drive around tomorrow to take a look? Okay, let's go to the Golden Crown Park first. I heard that their villas are pretty nice. As they were talking about the villas, suddenly there were violent noises from upstairs. The noises seemed to be coming from Wendy and Kenneth's room. Christopher and Hannah exchanged curious glances and quickly rushed out to see what had happened. At this moment, Wendy ran down the stairs with her disheveled clothes and a weeping voice. Christopher saw the reddish palm print on her face and frantically asked, "What's wrong, Wendy? Did Kenneth hit you?" Wendy wailed innocently, "Dad, Mom, I don't know why, but his manhood suddenly stopped working. I tried all kinds of methods, but it's still the same. Then he got angry and slapped me." "What? Stopped working?" Christopher asked in surprise. "What do you mean? What happened?" Wendy couldn't care less about the embarrassment and hurriedly explained, "That? His manhood. It just won't get erect, no reaction at all." "Huh?" Hannah shrieked. "Is it because of his age?" Wendy shook her head. "No, he was okay last night, but I don't know why. Today it suddenly couldn't work." Christopher finally understood why his daughter had been slapped. It was normal for a man to lose his mind when his manhood suddenly malfunctioned. Just then, Kenneth hurriedly ran down the stairs in his robe. Hannah quickly stopped him and asked, "Kenneth, what's going on? You could have used your words to tell Wendy what she did wrong. Why did you lay your hands on her?" Kenneth's face twisted into an agonizing grimace as he yelled, "Stop your fucking nonsense and take me to the hospital right now." Christopher was a little upset by Kenneth's rudeness. He wanted to argue with him when Lady Wilson walked toward them and said in a deep voice, "Christopher, stop standing there like a fool and go start your car. Kenneth's health is the most important thing right now." Christopher shut his mouth since Lady Wilson had demanded him to do so. He quickly grabbed his car key and rushed Kenneth to the hospital. On the way, Kenneth cursed Charlie over and over again while his expression was as painful and distressed as he could muster. He finally understood what Charlie had meant earlier. Rather than stomping it into a lump of rotten flesh, it was better to make him depressed by looking at the intact but useless manhood. Damn it! His words had come true. He didn't know what the bastard had done to him, but he had deprived his sexual functionality so stealthily and quietly. How did he do it? He clearly didn't harm his manhood physically. Why had his manhood suddenly stopped working? Truth be told, he had been taking extra care of his sexual function for many years. He had spent millions and millions in supplements and exercises so that he could remain active sexually and was even better than the young people in their 20s. What had Charlie done to him? The more Kenneth thought about it, the more panicked and uneasy he was, and he felt that Charlie was very peculiar and mysterious. He prayed that his disorder could be cured, but what if it couldn't? What was the point for him to stay alive? The Silver Wing Hospital. Since it was already night when they got to the hospital, they could only wait for their turn at the emergency department. After lining up for 20 minutes, it was finally their turn, and the first thing the doctor asked was, "Yes? What made you come here?" Kenneth shooed Christopher out of the ward before saying to the doctor, "Doctor, I think I'm impotent all of a sudden. Can you please check what happened to me?" "Impotent?" The doctor gaped in bewilderment and said, "Impotence is a neurological disorder. It doesn't fall under emergency cases. I suggest you come again tomorrow morning to the andrology department directly and let the doctor there check it out for you. We at the emergency department mainly cover emergency cases such as headaches, fever, accidental injuries, or spasmodic diseases." Kenneth growled indignantly. "My impotence is an emergency case. Can't I see you for treatment right away?" The doctor cleared his throat and started in an awkward tone. "Throughout my years as a doctor, I've never heard of sudden impotence. This disorder has a sequential process. It is okay at first, and then its performance starts to deteriorate slowly. Then, gradually and eventually, it becomes dysfunctional." Kenneth's face turned into an ugly shade of red as he didn't expect the doctor to describe the disorder in such a detailed manner, and he shouted, "Are you a fucking idiot? I asked you to check me! I don't need a lecture right now. Shut up and do your job." His blunt remarks enraged the doctor, and he blurted, "What is wrong with you? I told you that your case is not under our care. Shout at me again, and I'll ask the security guards to throw you out of here." "You—" Kenneth grit his teeth furiously. After a short pause, he pointed at the computer and said coldly, "You Google Modest Way Group." "Huh?" The doctor frowned in confusion. I want you to Google the Modest Way group." The doctor was stunned by his crude attitude, but his hands went over the mouse and keyboard reflexively, opening the browser and starting searching the Modest Way group. When he clicked into the company's website, he saw the portrait of its chairman, Kenneth Wilson. Huh? The man in the picture looked very similar to the grouchy man sitting in front of him. Oh shit, he was a big shot. The doctor switched his attitude and tone to a milder version and said respectfully, "Oh, Mr. Wilson, welcome to our humble hospital. I'm sorry for not recognizing you. Please forgive me." Then he quickly said, "Well, please tell me again what happened, and I'll see if I can arrange for you to be admitted to the hospital right away and have a specialist check on you." Kenneth's expression softened a little bit, but he was still grumpy. Nothing happened in between. It was fine yesterday, and then suddenly it became unresponsive today. The doctor asked curiously, "Is it totally unresponsive?" "Yes," Kenneth growled gloomily. "Totally, completely." Maybe it has something to do with the nervous system. Mr. Wilson, I'll ask the neurologist to come and check on you right away. Is that okay?" Kenneth waved his hand in irritation. "Hurry!" The doctor hurriedly called his colleague at the inpatient department to arrange the test and admission to the hospital. After all, at this hour, all the outpatient doctors had already gotten off work. The only doctors available at the moment were the inpatient department and the doctors on the night shift. Coincidentally, one of the doctors who were on duty tonight was the attending doctor when Jacob had suffered the spinal injury a few days ago. The doctor donned a serious expression as he performed a series of tests on Kenneth and looked at the various results. Laying on the examination bed, fear and horror flooded Kenneth's mind. He couldn't feel his manhood at all, almost as if it had disappeared into thin air. He closed his eyes and shuddered in dismay. He had always been active sexually. If his manhood was completely useless, he might as well just die. Sensing the unusual silence and intensity, Kenneth asked, "Doctor, how is it?" The doctor shook his head helplessly and answered, "Mr. Wilson, I'm afraid that we can't fix your problem. Based on our test and results, it shows that you suffer a disorder that we call penile necrosis, which means the nerves around your penis have suffered irreversible damage. I'm so sorry." "Could it be that your hospital is not good enough?" Christopher asked. The doctor squinted at him in annoyance and said, "With the current medicine and technology, we can cure the damaged nerves and let it slowly recover. But we can't do anything about the necrotic nerves. It's like encountering a car accident. Some people can recover slowly, but some will never stand again." Then he turned his glance back toward Kenneth and said in a solemn tone, "In your case, no one in the world can do anything about it. It can't be cured." "What? Ah! How can this be?" Kenneth's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He blurted in despair, "I have money! 10 million! Is it enough? Can you cure my manhood with $10 million? Again, the doctor said seriously, "Nerves are like human life. Even if you're dying, there is still a chance to save you, but if you're dead, you're dead. No one can bring the dead back to life." Then he continued, 10 million, you say? You can't bring the dead to life even if you have all the money in the world. Look at Steve Jobs. He was a very rich man, wasn't he? Still, he died from pancreatic cancer when he was in his 50s. Kenneth's heart skipped a beat. He was in a daze as if he had been struck by lightning. Was that it? Did the doctor mean to say that he would be impotent for the rest of his life? After all those years of hard work, he had made so much money so that he could enjoy his lavish and free life after his retirement. If his manhood forever malfunctioned, what else was there for him to stay alive? As the thought ran through his mind, the renowned business tycoon, Kenneth Wilson, covered his face and wept loudly, tears streaming down his face. Christopher, who was watching the scene, felt hot flashes in his eyes and almost burst into tears as well. As a man, he could understand Kenneth's pain very much. At the same time, he clutched his legs tightly and thought to himself that he would protect his manhood no matter what it took. A man was not a man when his little brother was useless. Just then, the doctor suddenly said, "By the way, Mr. Wilson, honestly speaking, I think that there may be someone who can cure your disorder." "What? Really?" Kenneth shrieked excitedly. He grabbed the doctor's hands and said in a stuttering voice, "Who? Who is it? Tell me." The doctor donned a mysterious smile. "He does not work in our hospital." "Then how do you know that he can cure nerve necrosis? Didn't you just say that it is irreversible?" Yes, indeed, but only he can cure it. He cured a patient who was paralyzed from the neck down. I saw it with my own eyes. I bet your case is a piece of cake for him since you're only paralyzed locally. Kenneth couldn't hide his excitement any longer. He blurted out, "Who is he? Where is he? Tell me now." The doctor smiled. "Mr. Wilson, I can introduce him to you, but don't you think a referral fee should be in place?" Kenneth immediately took out his checkbook and swiftly wrote a check for $100,000 to the doctor, saying, "I'll give you another $900,000 if the man you introduced can really cure me." The doctor took the check from Kenneth and looked at it with starry eyes. Then he said, "There is a genius doctor in Aruos Hill, Dr. Simmons. He cured a quadriplegic patient in our hospital a few days ago, which was a miracle in our neurology field. He has a clinic in the city, Serene World Clinic. If you see him, maybe he can cure you." Kenneth was stunned for a moment and asked joyfully, "Dr. Simmons, could you be referring to Douglas Simmons by any chance?" "Oh? Do you know Dr. Simmons?" the doctor asked curiously. Kenneth laughed delightedly. "Of course, and it's more than an acquaintance. The famous doctor you mentioned is our family's friend. Back then, when he was down and out, it was our family that helped him to rise again and achieve what he has now. I didn't know that he stays in Aruos Hill now. That's great." He jumped up from the bed and urged Christopher, "Hurry, get me to Dr. Simmons' clinic now." After asking for the address of Douglas Clinic, Christopher quickly drove Kenneth to Serene World Clinic. As soon as they arrived at the clinic's entrance, Kenneth hopped out of the car and dashed into the clinic anxiously when he saw a man that seemed to be a clinic staff pushing a young man with crutches out of the door. The young man limped miserably while pleading, Sir, please, I beg you, please inform Dr. Simmons that I need his help. I'll give him $5 million if he can fix my legs." The clinic staff said coldly, "Sorry, Mr. Grant. Dr. Simmons said that you have offended his savior, so he will not attend to you no matter how much money you pay." Then he continued, "By the way, Mr. Grant, you've come here every day for the past few days to the point that it disrupts our normal business. Dr. Simmons said that he will call the police if you come back tomorrow." The young man on crutches whined with a painful grimace. "Please, sir, can you please convey my message to Dr. Simmons? I'll give you $1 million as my messenger." The clinic staff pushed him out the door and growled, "Please just go, and don't come back again." Christopher recognized the young man. He was Jason Grant. Rumor had it that he had offended Charlie at the auto show. When Jacob had been hospitalized once again, he had caused a scene in disagreement with Charlie and was shoved out of the window from the ward on the 3rd floor of the hospital by Orville, breaking his legs in the process. Christopher hurried forward and asked in surprise, "Hey, Mr. Grant, what happened to you?" "Uncle Wilson?" Jason recognized Christopher, too. He sighed dejectedly and said, "Look at me. My legs were broken and it's quite severe. The doctor said that I might not be able to walk properly again for the rest of my life, so I'm here to seek help from Dr. Simmons. However, he didn't even want to see me and kicked me out." Christopher was startled and asked, "Is it because of Charlie that Dr. Simmons is not willing to see you?" "Yes." Jason grit his teeth and cursed. "I didn't know that even the renowned Dr. Simmons would be bewitched by that crooked liar." Kenneth was equally surprised. "Oh? What's going on? Does Uncle Simmons know Charlie, too?" Christopher nodded. "Yes, and they seem very close, too, but I don't know what's going on between them." Kenneth sneered. "Ha! My relationship with Uncle Simmons is at a different level than him. I've known Uncle Simmons from when I was 3 years old. It has been more than 50 years now." Then he walked into the clinic with a smug look and shouted, "Uncle Simmons! Help me, Uncle Simmons!" The clinic staff, who had just kicked Jason out, said, "Sir, we're already closed. Please come back tomorrow if you want to see the doctor." Kenneth hurriedly said, "Uncle Simmons and I are old friends. He is my family friend." Douglas heard the commotion and emerged from his room. He was surprised by what he saw and blurted out, "Kenneth, when did you come to Aruos Hill? Why are you here?" Kenneth answered, "It's a long story. Anyway, Uncle Simmons, there's something wrong with me. You must help me." "Okay, calm down. Tell me what happened." Kenneth sighed and started explaining his condition. Douglas frowned as he listened to Kenneth's description of his unusual disorder. Penile necrosis? This was an extraordinarily tricky problem. There was no known effective way of treating this problem in both Chinese and Western medicine. If it was truly necrosis, it was essentially untreatable. Douglas hurriedly asked, "How did it happen? What did you do? Penile necrosis is a very rare disorder." Kenneth didn't want to talk about his embarrassing incident, so he mumbled, "I don't know how, but it happened just like that. I went to the Silverwing Hospital to have it checked, and the doctor said that it was necrosis." Then he wailed and pleaded, "Uncle Simmons, please help me. Only you can help me now." Douglas felt that the problem was trickier than he could handle. Even with his medical skills, the most he could do was stabilize the necrosis so that his penis didn't wither, but it was impossible to cure the necrosis and restore its function. He sighed and said, "Kenneth, necrosis is universally known to be a tricky and difficult problem to solve. It is very serious, and I'm afraid there's nothing I can do." Kenneth said urgently, "Uncle Simmons, I heard from the doctor at the hospital that you can even cure a patient who was paralyzed from the neck down. I'm only paralyzed right there. Why can't you do anything about it?" "Frankly speaking, it's not incurable, but the cost of the treatment is too high," Douglas continued hesitantly. "I have a magical elixir from my savior, and the effect of the pill is very amazing and powerful. I think you'll get better after taking only half a pill." Kenneth grinned from ear to ear and pleaded, "Uncle Simmons, please give the pill to me then. You can't just stand there and watch me become impotent." Douglas was a little reluctant, and he said earnestly, "Kenneth, truth be told, I intended to keep the pill for emergency purposes. You know, healers do not heal themselves. I'm very old now. I may need to use the pill to save my own life when I'm dying someday." Kenneth hurriedly knelt on the floor and cried, "Uncle Simmons, you must help me. For the sake of my father and the many years of friendship between our two families, you must help me." Douglas pondered for a moment, his heart pounding vigorously as he struggled with his thoughts. After a while, he heaved a long sigh and said, "Okay, fine. I'll give you the pill." He had received a favor from Kenneth's father many years ago, and although he had repaid their favors by being their family doctor for several decades, he couldn't be indifferent to Kenneth's disorder. When Douglas finally yielded, Kenneth yelled in excitement and thanked Douglas over and over again. Just as Douglas went to retrieve the magical elixir that he kept like a priceless treasure, Zyla rushed into the clinic from outside. The overjoyed Kenneth saw the young and beautiful Zyla and said with a wide smile, "Hey, Zyla, do you still remember me? I'm Uncle Wilson." Zyla glared at him in shock as soon as she saw him, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw her grandfather taking out the magical elixir that Master Wade had given to him. She dashed toward him and whispered, "Grandpa, what do you think you're doing?" Douglas heaved another long sigh and said, "He's injured, so I'm giving him this pill to return his family's favor." Zyla shrieked in panic. "No, Grandpa, you can't do that. You've already repaid their favors thousands of times. Besides, about that wretched Kenneth Wilson, do you know who he offended today?" Douglas quickly asked. "Who?" "Master Wade.